Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to grecochess, the YouTube channel of chess. In the previous videos, if you watched them, I showed to you the games that played at the Atlantic City Open tournament. Not doing very well, 2 wins, 1 draw, 4 losses, and my rating going down from 1706 to 1653. But now back in Long Island and ready to continue with the Queen's Chess Club tournament, the Ed Kopiecki Memorial Tournament. There I had a draw in round number 1. In fact, a great result because my opponent was much stronger than me. I took a bye in the second round because I was in Atlantic City, and now time to resume round number 3. But first, some information about the tournament. In the memory of Ed Kopiecki, let's adjust the picture. Yes. In the memory of a former member of the club, Ed Kopiecki, that I don't remember myself, I didn't know him. It is 5 Swiss rounds in one section, everybody. And the time control is what you see here, G90, D5, meaning when players start, they have 90 minutes on their clocks, but when it's your time to play, for the first 5 seconds it delayed, the clock does not move, and then it continues going downwards. And you're supposed to, you expect, in fact, to complete all your moves before the clock hits 0. Round number 3, who was my opponent? His name is Brian Demery. His rating is 1323. Compare this is mine. 1656 officially, 1653 unofficially. He's 300 points, more than 300 points below me, so I was the favorite. But this gives extra pressure. And let's go to the chessport of chess.com to show the game. On my hands, I have the score sheet. I'm going to enter the moves one by one. And as we know, the computer of chess.com is going to give a numerical evaluation. Positive number means white is doing better. Negative means black is doing better. It's going to give a symbol as a comment of every move. Will tell us which move was the best after it had been played, then which are the top 5 options for the other player whose turn is to come. And Brian had the white piece, I had the black pieces. He starts with pawn to e4. Many moves in the going to be book moves I play with my standard French defense that I know it a little bit better than the others. I started playing it, and since I play it repeatedly, I have more experience with that, and smaller the chance to be caught by surprise. Knight to d2 for Brian. And here what do I do? It's very tempting to place my knight on c6 and attack the pawn on d4, but this is very easily defended. Instead, I prefer to send my other knight to f6 and threaten the pawn at d4. But the pawn goes to e5, my knight goes back to d7, I save, of course, my knight. Bishop to d3, Brian develops his bishop. And my pawn goes to c5. Until now, all of them book moves, 5 book moves, and Brian is ahead by 0.42, but that does not mean too much. Let's continue now. Brian sends his pawn to c3 to, of course, to protect the d4 pawn, to give more protection. My knight goes to c6, develop the other knight. Knight to e2 for Brian. And now I start taking pawns. See, everywhere till now, book moves, meaning it will continue developing standard theory. Takes on d4. Excuse me, I take on d4. And if Brian takes with the knight, I win the e5 pawn, but he's not going to fall for that. He takes with the c3 pawn. Queen to b6, more pressure on the d4 pawn. Knight goes to f3, from d2 to f3, more protection for the d4 pawn. And I check with my bishop from b4. And Brian replies by sending his bishop to d2. Still, book moves, usually book moves don't go that long, but here we are after White's 10th move, we are still in opening theory. How to continue now? Of course, during the game, you have no idea about this theory. It's too long, and no one, at least not our level, can memorize so many moves. At the top level, they can memorize even until 20 moves, perhaps. Who knows? Maybe one day I can reach that level. And now, what do? I want to give more space to myself and do something a little bit risky, because you don't want to push your f-pawn too early, because it opens the h5 e8 diagonal. But it seems that Brian doesn't have any chance to take advantage of that. But I have to be careful. Don't later also push both the f and the h pawn onto different moves, because then the g6 becomes very weak. But I decided to play my pawn to f6, not knowing if it was an okay move or if it was even a blunder. But computer thinks the best. We finished 10 moves. Out of the 20 moves, 10 for white, for black, 19 out of 20 a book, and mine, the 10th, is the best. But Brian is ahead by 0.63. Let's continue. Brian takes on f6, tries to open my defense. Again, the best. My knight takes on f6. Why knight? Because if I use my pawn, I'm opening too much my defense, and also I want my bishops on c8 to be able to protect the e6 pawn. Again, the best move. Castling for Brian. The best for him as well. Castling for me. Believe it or not, we finished 12 moves, and all of them are either book moves or the best. Very, very rare for this to happen. Brian sent his pawn to a3. But now it's not the best anymore. Still, it's an excellent. Let's see, what's the second best? Believe it or not, here the computer thought that a3 was the best, but after it calculates one prime and half a move more, it thinks it's not the best. But still, it's an excellent move. My bishop goes to d6. Of course, I'm going to save my bishop. Rook to b1 for Brian, that wants to save his b2 pawn. Computer doesn't like it, rather have the bishop go to c3. The first move in the game 14 for white that takes not positive evaluation, a negative evaluation, inaccuracy. My queen goes to c7, threatening the h2 pawn, inaccuracy for me as well. Pawn to h3 for Brian. Currently the f3 knight protects h2, but he doesn't want to rely on the f3 knight and wants to have the freedom to move it. Bishop to d7, I develop my light colored bishop. Rook to a1 for Brian. But before we do that, let's go half a move before. We finished 15 moves. What is the score? Brian's ahead by 0.63. Game is more or less even. These are small differences. Rook to e1. My rook to e8. Challenging the semi-open e file. Rook to c1 for Brian, that wants to place his knight opposite my queen, and if my knight moves, I lose my queen. And what if my knight is attacked and I'm in dilemma, either lose the knight or the queen? That is why my queen goes to b8, no pin for the knight any longer. Pawn to b4. Brian wants to start attacking, expanding along the queen side. My pawn to a6. Don't want it to go to b5 and attack my knight on c6. Queen to b3 for Brian. And at that point, I did a move. I didn't know if it was good or I knew it was not bad, but it might have been a complete waste, and you cannot afford to waste moves. But I saw queen and king on the same diagonal from, you see, from, I'm sorry, wrong arrow, from a2 goes to g8. And I don't want to, because if I move one of my pawns here, I spin. I don't want to have to rely on such spins, not to rely to suffer such spins. And that's why I send my king to h8. Computer thinks the third best move. At least it is a good, it's not an inaccuracy or a blunder or mistake or a blunder. Bishop to e3 for Brian, more protection to the d4 pawn. And now that I don't have to worry about these pins, my pawn can move freely from e6 to e5. I wanted to give more space to myself open. The problem with that is after the exchanges are done, even if I don't lose material, my my D5 pawn here is isolated, which may not be a good idea. You don't want unnecessarily to have isolated pawns, but other than that, my D6 pawn was backwards, my E6 pawn was backwards here. Now at least it's not backwards any longer. Hopefully, after get more space, I'll make a good tactics. We finished 20 moves with the score. Brian is ahead by 0. Computer even thinks that my move is the best. Computer thinks that is the best, but computer thinks that Brian is still ahead by 0.34. Let's see what's going to happen. We have the first round of exchanges. D4, my knight takes. Why not the bishop? Because the knight will take whatever comes here. I don't want to lose a bishop. Rather lose the knight. And yes, Brian used his knight to take my knight, and I use my bishop. And as you see here, my d5 pawn is isolated. I need to rely on pieces to defend it. Queen on b3 attacks it. Knight on f6 defends it. And now bishop goes to c5 for Brian that attacks my rook on f8. What can I do? I don't want it to be on g8 and block my king, and perhaps if the pawn leaves, have the queen attacking, although take it because you're not going to sacrifice the queen for a rook. But I thought the best defense was just block this attack and place my bishop on d6. Computer would rather do what? I don't understand what the computer wants. To check from h2, okay. King goes to h1 and bishop goes to d6. Ah, yes, so computer wants me first to check and then go back. I'm not sure what I would gain out of that. In any case, Brian decides to exchange. Computer thinks it's the best for him. I don't know why, because his bishop was supported by the rook, and he could usually they say to take is a mistake. If I was him, I wouldn't have been in such a rush to do the exchange, but it's not a disaster. It's not anything important. Rook goes to c5 for Brian. And my bishop goes to c6. Inaccuracy is the computer. My bishop goes to c6. I want my bishop to aim towards g2. Perhaps if I had forced the king to go to h1, then the g2 pawn would be pinned. We finished 25 moves with the score. Brian's ahead by 0.19. The game is more or less even. Rook goes to c1 for Brian to strengthen his presence on the open c file. 2 rooks there. Computer thinks a mistake, however. Not easy to spot them. I mean, I still believe that this move makes sense. My knight goes to d7, attacking the rook. Rook goes back, of course, to c2, saves the rook. My queen goes to f6, attacks the pawn on f2. Knight goes to g3 to defend it. Not to defend it directly. It's not the knight that defends it, but the line is open for the rook to defend the f2 pawn if the queen decides to take it. My knight goes to e5. We finished 28 moves. I have a small advantage, and then Brian does what I saw at the game that it was a blunder. Bishop goes to a6. It's a blunder. Why? What was Brian thinking? If the pawn takes back, then the rook can take the bishop and he wins the pawn. The problem is that knight can take, rook takes knight, queens take rook, and I am ahead by one piece. I saw it on time, of course. I had to double check to make sure that there is nothing hidden. But even if it didn't work out, whether it took or not, I would still be a pawn behind. But in this case, in fact, I'm ahead by a piece. I take on a6, wonderful, and now I'm ahead by 4.05. Brian pushes his pawn to a4. and my rook goes to c8. I want now to exchange. I'm ahead by a piece. Computer doesn't like it, thinks it's inaccuracy, but after 30 moves, I'm ahead by 3.25. But don't forget, in the Atlantic City Open, in 3 games I was ahead and I ended up losing them. Would that happen here? I wanted to exchange as fast as possible, and I was determined also to take a break when I felt tired, which I did eventually, not to suffer from too much fatigue. And let's see if I can win it, or if fate will play again a nasty game on me. Brian sees a chance. Now he sends his pawn to b5. Understand, if the bishop takes it, I lose not only I lose a rook. Unfortunately, the moment I send my king to h8, there is a chance for backhand mate. Of course, for the time being, I can save it by taking the pawn. Brian takes the pawn, and now I send my bishop to b7. I'm forcing exchange of pieces. That's what I want. To exchange and go to a winning ending as fast as possible before I have the chance to commit any blunders. So Brian exchanges the first pair of rooks. And I decide, instead of directly taking back the rook, why not to win a pawn at f2? Here we are, check on f2, and then take back the rook. Computer thinks a mistake, and my advantage, I still am ahead, but my advantage becomes much less. But I felt what harm to take a rook, especially in front of the white king. King to h1, of course. And now I take the rook. Brian takes it. My bishop takes it. We finished 35 moves. I'm ahead, but less than before, 173. And then I saw to my horror that things don't go so nice as I was hoping. I think you can see why, because of the background issue. Queen will take on e5 and is going to attack both the knight on e5 and my bishop on c8. And yes, I can take the knight on g3 and protect my knight, but then we have background problems. What should I do? First of all, protect the knight or my knight on e5, because you understand, if I lose a piece, I'm a piece ahead. If I lose a piece, first of all, I'll be a pawn behind, you see, because of the b5 pawn, which is very dangerous. I need to defend both of my pieces against the back rank. First of all, let's protect the knight with a check on e1. Check means that my opponent has no time for the background. Inaccuracy is a computer, but what should I do? Knight f7. Maybe, but then queen can attack the bishop on c8. Maybe that's a bit better. In case, check on e1. King to h2. And bishop to e6. Now do something very, very tricky. If Brian is greedy and takes my bishop, then my knight will go to f3 check, and I win the queen with a discovering attack. If Brian decides to check, whether from d8 or from a8, my bishop can go back to g8 and stop the check, so no back rank. I thought that it was a clever move, and computer thinks the best, yes, to avoid back rank, but after some inaccuracies, my advantage becomes minimal. Brian, and of course, if Brian doesn't move his queen, he loses it. He sends his queen to a8 check. And of course, not the only, technically I can also put my bishop to c8, but the only move that does not win the game immediately is bishop goes to g8. Of course, the best. Brian advances the pawn, and now I'm scared. How can I stop it? The problem with the queen on a8 is I cannot rely on my queen going to the second rank and then my knight to f3, because the queen will take my knight. Computer still thinks it's the best thing to place the queen on e2, but I want to block the b pawn. And that's why I place my queen on b1. That's not one of the top 5 moves. And the moment I do that's a mistake, and the evaluation is 0.00. Now I have to basically win again the game. Pawn to b7. This gives me one small ray of hope, because now the diagonal from a8 to h1 is not controlled by the white queen on a8. This I get seen, and that's why I thought if I can take advantage, I could put my queen on. It's too late now for the check here. If I can put my queen on perhaps e4, but finally decided, let's put my knight on d7, and at least I'm blocking the promotion square. We finished 40 moves, and the score is 0.00. Brian, if Brian decides to promote the pawn, then I attack the b8 square twice and defend it only once by the queen, so I win the pawn and the game is mine. But Brian, instead of doing this, he plays the best move on the computer. Queen goes to c8. What does this mean? It means that if I do nothing, I lose my queen and the pawn is promoted. My queen goes to b5. Computer wants my queen to go to d6. I place it on b5, so it both protects the knight and also controls the b8 square. Brian takes my knight, I take his queen, and pawn promotes. So the result is that we are going to an ending. Both sides have a queen, a light piece, and 2 pawns facing each other. So this, under perfect game, it would be drawn. But the time is advancing. Both of us are in a tough situation, very tired from the game, and too many combinations to see, especially with queens on the board. And it's going to be decided on who is going to make a mistake first. First of all, I want to avoid back rank issues. Pawn goes to h6. I don't want suddenly to have a back rank mate when I least expect it. Let's continue. Queen goes to b2 for Brian to pin my pawn on g7. My queen goes to d6. I'm pinning the knight on g3. I want, if possible, to pin the knight, which means that if the king moves, the knight is lost. The knight cannot move. So I want to make the Brian's knight a useless piece. But Brian has a different idea. Queen to f2 protects the knight, so the king can leave h2 now. My bishop goes to e6. I don't need it at the 8th rank any longer. And we finished 45 moves. The score is still 0.00. Let's see how long this will last. Brian decides to place his king to g1. So it's the knight on g3 is not pinned any longer. My king goes to h7 because I don't want a sudden check on the 8th rank to destroy tactics I may have otherwise, or to give a chance for a tactic for Brian. Queen goes to 3 for Brian. Bishop goes to d5, attacks the queen. Queen to f5 check. I don't know how to cover it. Pawn goes to g6, attacking the queen. But there is no further check for Brian. Queen can go neither to f7 nor to d7 for check. So Brian needs to move it and cannot make a check. So Brian moves it to d3 and pins my bishop on d5. My queen goes to c5 and pins my bishop with a check now. King goes to h2. And here I make a mistake. I should have perhaps, now computer wants me to do a lot of things. Any of these 5 moves, plus perhaps pin the knight again with queen to d6, but I wanted to start advancing my pawns, but I chose the wrong moment. Pawn to h5. And only when Brian played his computer things are good, but I wouldn't call it good. I would call it at least a mistake, if not a blunder. And I only realized the extent of this blunder at the next move of Brian when he took on h5, and I saw that my pawn on g6 was pinned and cannot take back the knight. But before we do that, after 50 moves, no 0-0 any longer. Brian is ahead by 0.24. Took the pawn. Take advantage of my mistake. Queen to d6 check. Now the story is, if I can check and my queen being anywhere here, I can win the knight. But Brian is not taking any chances of this happening, so he replies by sending his knight to g3, and the knight is pinned. And unfortunately, I don't have an h pawn to start advancing and attack the knight to g3. My queen goes to e5. Queen goes to e2. Brian wants to exchange pieces. And computer thinks it's not a bad idea to exchange them. If we exchange, you see here, then Brian's advantage is very small, 0.03. But myself, since I'm down in material, I don't want exchanges. So to avoid exchanges, my queen goes to c7 and keeps the knight pinned. Queen goes to d2 for Brian and attacks my bishop. My bishop goes to b7. I don't want my bishop to be pinned. I want the knight to continue being pinned. Queen goes to f2 for Brian. Again, protects the knight, and again unpin it with the king moving h1 or h2. My bishop goes to a8. I don't even know what to do any longer. I just want to keep the situation, hoping that Brian would make a mistake. We finish 55 moves. Brian is ahead by 0.29. Again, same story. King goes to g1. So queen protects the knight. And the knight being on a dark colored square, my bishop cannot attack it. I don't have a pawn that can attack it. My king can go to h5. If the knight is not pinned, I can have a sudden not only discover a double check. The queen goes to b7, and now I'm threatening. If the queen stops protecting g2, I have mate. Now the only reason I cannot mate on g2 is because of the queen on f2 protecting it. Brian sends his knight to e2. My queen checks from e1. King goes to h2. My queen goes to a2 to pin the knight. After I make sure that the knight cannot jump anywhere and check my king. King goes to g1. The queen goes to d5, again the same diagonal that goes from a8 to g2, and if the queen is not on f2, I have mate in 1. I'm constraining the queen. The knight goes to f4 for Brian and attacks my queen. My queen goes to e4. My queen is safe, and I continue attacking the g2 square. But now there's a problem that this square on g2 is doubly protected, both by the queen and by the knight. So Brian is free to let one of his pieces leave its current square. Of course, if the queen moves, it must continue protecting both G2, not necessarily, but definitely protect the knight on f4. Otherwise, he loses the knight. We finished 60 moves. What the score? Brian is ahead by 0.35, and time now to turn the page because of the scores they gave us. There's place for 60 moves in page number 1. Page number 2, it goes all the way until 140 moves, so it's very unlikely we'll need a second page in Queen's Chess Club. How do we continue? Queen goes to g3, and Brian continues protecting g2 pawn twice. Bishop goes to 6, same story. Pawn to h4 for Brian that wants to start moving his h pawn. My queen goes to f5. Queen to e3 for Brian. My bishop goes to e4. Till now, Brian has a very small advantage, but not decisive. Knight goes to h3 for Brian. I wish I could take it. My queen goes to g4. And this is a blunder. Without looking at the right, if you can see why it's a blunder. And myself during the game, I didn't realize it was a blunder. Brian did not take advantage of that, just to give you a heads up. But if Brian had seen it, my situation would be very tough. If you want, you may want to pause your video because it's a nice problem. And if you pause your video, I'm not sure if you found it. If you found it, you may want to write in the comments. What Brian should have done is queen takes, and if my queen takes back, knight to g5 check and wins my bishop, and Brian wins the game. So Brian could have won immediately, but fortunately for me, he didn't see it, sends the queen to f2. And me saying my queen goes to d1 to check, and none of us had realized what had happened, and I only noticed now when I was preparing this video. 65 moves have finished, and Brian is ahead by 0.51. Clearly, whoever makes such a big mistake later on, and assuming the other side finds out this, is going to decide the game. But let's see what will happen. 65 moves, Brian's ahead by 0.51. Let's continue. King goes to h2, Brian has to reply to check. Queen checks from d6. Queen goes to g3. And now computer thinks my best option would be to exchange the queens, but myself, I was afraid that with 2 versus 1 pawns, Brian has the advantage and better chances to win the game. That's why I refuse to exchange. And my queen goes to e7. Save my queen. And the knight goes to g5 for Brian. It's a check, and it's a very difficult one, how to respond. Well, it's not that the check is going to lead to mate or even is going to lead to any kind of tactics, but you never know what will happen next move. If I place my knight on g7, queen can check from c3. If I place it on h6, I'm not sure what can come out of that. Maybe f4 and a discover check. On G or H8, we're going to have the queen going to B8 and check, and who knows what. And too little time. We had less and less time to calculate. And unfortunately, I only did the 5th best move, and the computer thinks only king to G8 is safe. Everything else gives at least 5 points advantage of Brian, and my reply gave him 10 points. King goes to G8, believe it or not, which computer thinks it is a mistake. But will Brian take advantage of that? His queen goes to c3, this I expected. King goes to g8. Well, where else? This is the best move on the computer, but still I'm way behind. You see, 8.36. Queen to c8 check. King to g7. Maybe we're going for repetition, I thought, during the game. Finish 70 moves, and Brian's ahead by 10.7. I didn't even notice it during the game. Let's continue. Queen to c3 check seems like going for repetition. King to g8. Queen to c4 for a check, and then I started noticing. But it was too late. Even before my move, it was too late. King goes to f8. And queen takes on e4. At that point, I knew things were going very bad. My only hope now was to keep the queens on the board. Who knows? Queen goes to d6 for a check. At that time, because we had less than 3 minutes, not only less than 5 minutes, we stopped keeping note. But what I remember is king went to h3. Queen check from a3. I think the only place to to check. Maybe I could have checked from d7, but the queen came to h3 to check, and Brian replied by placing his queen on f3 and checking me. And then if I didn't want to lose the queen, we had to, my queen for nothing, we had to exchange queens. And from that point on, we played a few more moves in the last 2 seconds until Brian was able to promote on his pawn, brought the king near the pawn. And unfortunately, believe it or not, once again, fourth game in a few days where I had the advantage, I was ahead, I ended up losing the game. And so in the Princess Club, in 3 rounds, I have 1 draw, 1 bye, and 1 loss. Let's see the review, what the computer has to say. And of course, Brian, congratulations for winning this game. Because in spite of the mistake you made, you went on, keep fighting, and finding finally the way to win the game. You deserve congratulations. Computer thinks that Brian did 91.4% accuracy. I had 87.5. No brilliances. Great moves, 3 versus 1 for Brian. 10 versus 9 book for Brian. Best 30 20 versus 25 for Brian. Excellent 21 versus 18 for me. Good 9 versus 6 for me. Inaccuracies 6 of that. Mistakes 2 for Brian, 1 for me. Misses 1 for Brian. And blunders 1 for Brian that gave me advantage at some point, and 2 for me, the one that Brian could not take advantage, as I had mentioned, and the second one that unfortunately he took advantage and won the game. Not easy to lose to someone that is rated more than 300 points below you, but these things happen. I measure once again, I'm not quitting, I'm not desperate. I'll just take my lesson and hope that eventually I start learning my lessons, and especially how to keep concentration and to keep my energy and my stamina. Not easy lessons to me. But enough of that. Let's see what's happened to the tournaments I'll be following. Grecochess continuing. We're still in the first round. I'm eliminated, as you see here. Got the third place in my group, where only the first advances. Let's see how many players have guaranteed advance the next round. F1954, Alex from Britain is the first. Roberto 3015 from Brazil is the second. From my group is Mr. Hajif from Azerbaijan, the third. Hazel Hurskid from the United States, the fourth that is advanced. And Gila from Israel is the fifth. So we have 5 out of 16 players have advanced the next round. Let's see what will happen next. And as far as games are concerned, out of the 192 games the first round, 150 have been completed and 42 remaining. See what happens in the other tournaments. The annual of chess.com, where I proudly made it the second round, but second round it's almost hopeless because only 1 out of 12 advances, and I have the 9th best rating, and I have started with 4 losses against the top 2 players. Numismatics and chess from the United States, and the chess magician from India. And it's not 12 too much of that. Let's go to the Moonlight Underwater that's organized by Zanila from Italy, my subscriber. And when the last round, the final round, 6 players remain, and we have 1 out of the 30 games has been completed. AIM AMMT from Indonesia has defeated Möbius from Nigeria. The next video, assuming nothing else comes in the middle, we are going to cover this game and see how it goes. In the meantime, I really want to thank all of you for watching it, the viewers, the subscribers. Please consider subscribing if you have not done so. The likes and the comments. Some of you have left me some very encouraging comments. Hope we are all learning from that. I have learned quite a lot going through all the lengths to analyze my games. The next lesson I need to learn is keep my concentration until the very end of the game. Don't lose games that, in theory, I'm winning. Theoretically, one game means it was lost. So that's it for now. Thanks, everyone. This is grecochess. I'm your host, Charilaos Aneziris. If you want to participate and commemorate the 1 year of the beginning of the channel, it happens on May. Glad to do so. Just send me a message or an email. I'll be glad to respond. For now, to all of you, thanks and goodbye.